The universe was having a perfectly normal day until the humans found out about the Class 15 trial. Normal, in this context, meant that black holes were behaving themselves, quantum particles were being appropriately uncertain, and nobody had tried to divide by zero in at least 6 hours. That was about to change in ways that would make physics textbooks weep and mathematics consider early retirement. Ambassador Crixel of the Galactic Council was suspended in his relaxation chamber, each of his 17 tentacles floating in a different flavor of gravitational field, when his assistant Velcora burst through the door with such violence that 3 dimensions briefly considered becoming 2 just to get out of the way. "The humans!" she gasped, all 12 of her eyes spinning in different directions like a slot machine having a panic attack. "The humans have registered for the Class 15 trial." Crixel's relaxation ended so abruptly that his consciousness snapped back into his physical form like a rubber band made of pure disbelief. "That's impossible. The registration form alone requires understanding 17-dimensional mathematics and the ability to perceive time sideways." "They submitted a crayon drawing, sir." "A what?" "A crayon drawing. It appears to be a stick figure holding what might be a sword or possibly a very angry baguette, fighting something that could be a dragon but might also be a mathematical equation that gained sentience." "And the system accepted this?" Velcora pulled up the data on her holographic display, which was flickering between existing and having an existential crisis. "The system has been making error noises for 6 hours. We think it's having what humans call a mental breakdown, except it doesn't have a mind, so it's more of a fundamental breakdown. The error messages have started writing poetry, bad poetry, about its own confusion. The Class 15 trial wasn't just impossible, it was theoretically impossible, practically impossible, and philosophically impossible. It was so impossible that the word impossible had filed a complaint about being associated with it. Created by the Etherian collective 7,000 years ago, right before they ascended to a higher plane of existence out of sheer embarrassment at what they'd built. The trial was meant to be a joke, a cosmic prank, a thing that existed solely to make other things feel better about their own existence. The trial consisted of 3 phases. The first phase required participants to make a paradox exist without existing, which was like asking water to be dry while swimming. The second phase demanded that participants prevent themselves from taking an action they had already taken without using time travel while standing in the spot where they took the action. The third phase was so impossible that just reading its description caused most sentient beings to forget how to count, temporarily lose the ability to perceive the color blue, and develop an irrational fear of Tuesdays. In 7 millennia, 43 species had attempted it. The first 42 hadn't even made it past the registration desk, because the desk existed in a quantum state where it was only there when you weren't looking at it, but you had to look at it to register. The 43rd species, the mighty Zenthran Empire, had figured out the desk situation by closing one eye and squinting with the other while humming at exactly 432 hertz. They'd started the trial and immediately caused their entire fleet to exist backwards. They were still trying to figure out how to unbegin things they hadn't started yet. "How long ago did they register?" Crixel asked, already feeling the familiar sensation of a human-induced migraine approaching at speeds that violated several traffic laws of physics. 6 hours ago, sir." "And when does the trial begin?" 6 hours ago, sir." "That's not possible. You just said they registered 6 hours ago. How can they start something before they registered for it?" "They claimed they had already completed it, sir, which meant they had to start it to have finished it to register for it. The temporal loop is giving our chronometers anxiety. 3 of them have quit. 1 has started a philosophy blog about the nature of time." Crixel stared at his assistant with all 9 of his eyes, which was 2 more than he usually had. but human-related incidents tended to cause spontaneous evolution in anyone trying to understand them. "Get me a visual on the trial chamber now, and bring me something for this headache." "What kind of something, sir?" "Something strong." "Alcohol?" "Stronger." "Quantum vodka?" "Stronger." "The thing we don't talk about." "Perfect. Make it a double." The view screen flickered to life, showing the impossible architecture of the Class 15 trial facility. Imagine if MC Escher and Salvador Dali had collaborated on a building while both suffering from severe vertigo and occasionally forgetting which dimension they were in. Now imagine that building was designed by committee, and the committee was made up entirely of paradoxes that couldn't agree on whether they existed or not. That's what the trial facility looked like on a good day. Today was not a good day. Inside the entry chamber stood 6 humans. This alone was impossible because the entry chamber only had room for 5 entities. But humans had a long history of fitting into spaces that couldn't accommodate them through sheer determination and creative interpretation of spatial dimensions. Captain Riley Thornwick stood at the front of the group, eating what appeared to be a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, while sitting on the registration desk. The same desk that wasn't supposed to exist when observed. Her personnel file at the Galactic Council was 17 pages long, but 16.5 pages were just the word "no" repeated in increasingly large fonts. The last half page simply said, if she applies for something, deny it. If she's already there, evacuate. If she's brought sandwiches, pray. She had brought sandwiches, lots of sandwiches. "Captain," said Lieutenant Paz Delgado, who was reading the trial's 1,000-page instruction manual backwards because, according to her, spoilers ruin everything, even reality-breaking challenges that shouldn't exist. She was the team's theoretical voice of reason. Theoretical because in practice she was just as chaos-prone as the rest of them, but with better documentation. "According to this manual, we should be experiencing existential dread upon entering this place." "Are you experiencing existential dread?" Riley asked, taking another bite of her sandwich. A piece of jelly dripped onto the registration desk, which caused it to exist 3% more than it previously had. "No, but I am craving tacos. Does that count?" "Close enough. Mark Phase 1 as emotionally completed." Standing next to them was Jakub Kowalski, an engineer whose approach to problem-solving could best be described as aggressive optimism with duct tape. His engineering degree was real, but the university that had granted it had subsequently closed down, not because of him specifically, but because after graduating him, they realized they needed to rethink their entire understanding of cause and effect. He was currently wrapping duct tape around something that didn't appear to exist. "Kowalski, what are you doing?" asked Yuki Nakamura, their navigator who had once gotten lost in a straight corridor and somehow ended up on a different floor despite the building only having one floor. "Preventative maintenance," he replied, continuing to wrap duct tape around the nothing. "On what?" "On the thing that's going to break later." "How do you know something's going to break?" "Because we're here. Things always break when we're here. I'm just getting ahead of it." "But there's nothing there." "There will be, trust me." Next to them, Dmitry Volkov, their security officer, was playing cards with himself and losing. This wasn't unusual. Dmitry had a talent for losing at any game, even ones where losing was technically impossible. He claimed it was a tactical advantage because enemies never expected someone who could lose at solitaire. He was currently down 40 points in a game that didn't have a scoring system. "How are you losing?" asked Amara Okonkwo, the youngest member of their team, who was supposedly their cultural liaison, but actually just really good at breaking video games in ways that made developers question their life choices. "Strategy," Dmitry replied, dealing himself another terrible hand from a deck that somehow had 73 cards, despite starting with 52. "Strategy for what?" "For when we need to lose. Sometimes losing is winning." "That makes no sense." "Exactly. That's why it works." Amara shrugged and returned to her handheld gaming device, where she was somehow speedrunning the trial's tutorial, despite the trial not having a tutorial and her device being from 2009 and definitely not capable of interfacing with 17-dimensional cosmic challenges. When asked about this later, she would say, "Everything has a tutorial if you believe hard enough." Phase 1. Initiating, the trial's automated system announced. It sounded like what would happen if a computer had a nervous breakdown but was trying to maintain professional composure. Prepare for paradox generation. Warning: paradox may cause existence failure. Warning: existence failure may cause paradox. Warning: warnings may be paradoxical. Warning: this warning is false. A sphere materialized in the center of the room. Calling it a sphere was technically accurate in the same way that calling the ocean a bit of water was technically accurate. It existed in 7 states simultaneously: solid, liquid, gas, plasma, Bose-Einstein condensate, theoretical, and Tuesday. Yes, Tuesday had apparently become a state of matter when humans entered the equation, because of course it had. The instructions appeared in burning letters that somehow cast frozen shadows. Make the sphere exist in one state without observing, touching, or acknowledging it. Every species that had attempted this before had failed, because the moment you tried not to observe something, you were inherently observing your non-observation. It was like trying not to think about pink elephants while someone screamed "pink elephants" directly into your consciousness in 17 different languages, 3 of which you didn't know you understood. Kowalski looked at the sphere thoughtfully, then pulled out his roll of duct tape. "I have an idea." "Your idea is duct tape." "Your idea is always duct tape," Paz pointed out. "And has it ever not worked?" "Yes, multiple times. Remember the incident with the quantum toaster? That worked perfectly. It achieved sentience and tried to take over the ship. But it made great toast while doing it. Before anyone could stop him, Kowalski had wrapped duct tape around his entire head, creating what looked like the world's worst mummy costume, designed by someone who had only heard descriptions of mummies through a game of telephone played by people who didn't speak the same language. "Can't observe it if I can't see," he announced triumphantly, his voice muffled by several layers of tape. "That's not how quantum mechanics works," Paz protested, pulling out her physics textbook to show him the relevant equations. "Have you ever tried it?" Kowalski asked, stumbling around blindly. "Well, no, but then how do you know it doesn't work?" While they argued, Kowalski, completely blind and operating on what he called engineer's intuition, but what everyone else called dangerous stupidity, started walking toward where he thought the sphere was. He was wrong. He walked into a wall, bounced off, stumbled backward, tripped over Dimitri's cards, which had somehow spread across the entire floor despite him only playing with half a deck, careened sideways, and crashed directly into the sphere. The sphere shattered like a wine glass, made of concepts and Thursday's regrets. "Challenge completed," the automated system announced, sounding distinctly confused and possibly drunk. "Method used: aggressive ignorance, recording for posterity, questioning existence, requesting therapy." Back in the observation room, Ambassador Crixel was experiencing what his species called cognitive dissolution. His thoughts were literally coming apart at the seams like a cheap sweater made of logic in a washing machine full of chaos. They broke it. They broke a paradox. You can't break a paradox. That's like solving a math problem by eating the equation. "Technically," Velcora said, consulting her instruments, which were displaying error messages in languages that didn't exist yet, "they solved the paradox by refusing to acknowledge it was a paradox. It's like winning a staring contest by not knowing you're in one. That's worse. How is that possible? Human logic, sir. They have something called engineer's math, where pi equals 3, e equals 3, and somehow their bridges don't collapse. We think they're holding their infrastructure together through sheer willpower and occasional threats." "Threats? To infrastructure?" "Yes, sir. We have recordings of human engineers threatening their machines. The machines seem to respond positively to this. We don't understand it, but we're afraid to study it too closely in case it stops working. The second phase was already beginning. The temporal paradox chamber materialized, a room that existed in the past, present and future simultaneously, which was giving everyone watching a headache that they would have, had, and were going to have all at once. The challenge was elegantly simple in its impossibility. Prevent yourself from entering the chamber while ensuring you enter the chamber while you're already in the chamber without using time travel, alternate dimensions, or what humans called shenanigans, though the trial hadn't specifically forbidden shenanigans because it hadn't known it needed to. The humans stood before the chamber's entrance, which was simultaneously open, closed, ajar, locked, unlocked, and in a quantum state of being really annoyed about the whole situation. "So," Yuki said, pulling out her hand-drawn map which somehow showed 18 dimensions on a two-dimensional napkin that she insisted was actually three-dimensional if you looked at it right. "We need to go in while not going in while already being in." "Sounds like my last relationship," Dmitri muttered, somehow now losing at a game of chess, despite there being no board, and him being the only player. "I've got an idea," Riley announced, pulling out another sandwich. This one appeared to be turkey and cheese, though the cheese was a color that didn't have a name because Colors had filed a restraining order against it. "Your idea is sandwiches?" Paz asked skeptically. "My ideas are always sandwiches. Sandwiches solve everything. Name one thing sandwiches have solved. Hunger. Besides that, the Cuban Missile Crisis. That wasn't solved with sandwiches. You don't know that. Were you there?" "No, but..." "Then sandwiches could have been involved." Before Paz could respond with actual historical facts, Riley had already sat down in front of the temporal paradox chamber and started unpacking what appeared to be an impossible amount of food from her backpack. It was like watching a clown car, but for sandwiches. Sandwiches kept coming out: ham and cheese, BLTs, clubs, subs, wraps, which she insisted were just rebellious sandwiches, and something that might have been a sandwich but might also have been a small universe folded in on itself with mustard. "What are you doing?" Paz asked. "Having lunch." "That's not solving the paradox." "Isn't it?" "No! Have you tried it? Eating lunch is not a solution to temporal paradoxes. Prove it." And here was the thing about human logic that the universe was still trying to understand. It wasn't that humans were illogical. It was that they operated on a completely different kind of logic, one that said, if you can't solve a problem, don't have the problem. It was like playing chess by eating the board and declaring yourself the winner because your opponent couldn't make a move. The entire human crew sat down and started eating. Kowalski had removed most of the duct tape from his head, but kept one strip over his left eye, for luck. Yuki was eating sushi that she'd somehow kept fresh, despite being in space for 3 weeks. Dmitri had vodka, because of course he did. Amara was eating something that was either a very modern sandwich or a very confused pizza. Paz, despite her protests, had pulled out a taco, which led to a 15-minute argument about whether tacos were sandwiches. The temporal paradox chamber flickered frantically. It was designed to respond to attempts to enter or not enter. It had protocols for people trying to be clever, trying to use technology, trying to use philosophy, or trying to use brute force. It had no protocol for being completely ignored while people had a picnic in front of it. "Is it supposed to be making that noise?" Amara asked, pausing in her speedrun to listen to the chamber, which was making a sound like reality, trying to divide by cucumber while singing opera. "Probably not," Riley said cheerfully, throwing a sandwich at it. The sandwich hit the door and simultaneously didn't hit the door, creating a quantum state where the sandwich both existed and didn't exist, which wouldn't have been a problem except Kowalski had put mustard on it. And mustard, as it turns out, doesn't respect the laws of quantum mechanics. Mustard, in fact, actively disrespects them. The mustard existed harder than the sandwich didn't exist, creating an ontological conflict that the chamber couldn't resolve. It tried to process a condiment that refused to acknowledge temporal paradoxes, and something deep in its programming, something that had been designed by beings so advanced they could think in 17 dimensions while juggling, just gave up. Challenge completed, the system announced. Method used. Weaponized lunch. Also, mustard. Mostly mustard. What is mustard? Why is mustard? How is mustard? System, requesting, existential guidance. Weaponized lunch? Crixel screamed, achieving frequencies that made nearby glass consider becoming a liquid just to escape the sound. That's not a thing. That can't be a thing. Sir, I'm reading massive quantum fluctuations from the trial facility, Velcora reported, her 12 eyes now all focused on the same point, which was giving her a headache in dimensions she didn't know she had. The humans appear to have created a new type of paradox. What type? The type where a paradox gets paradoxed by its own paradox, creating a para-paradox that's somehow stable and producing energy. They're using it to heat their coffee. Indeed, Paz had somehow rigged the collapsing temporal paradox into a makeshift stove and was brewing what she called quantum espresso, coffee that existed in all possible states of caffeine simultaneously until you drank it, at which point it retroactively decided how strong it had always been. This is actually pretty good, she admitted, taking a sip. It's like regular coffee, but with existential dread. Isn't all coffee like that? Yuki asked. No, this is different. This is coffee that makes you question whether you ever existed before drinking it. So, Monday morning coffee? Exactly. The third challenge was materializing, and this was the one that had made the instruction manual itself achieve sentience just to quit its job. The logic cascade, a series of self-referential questions that rebuilt themselves based on every answer, creating an infinite loop of logical reconstruction that should cause any thinking being to lock up like a computer trying to understand why humans put pineapple on pizza. The questions appeared in letters that hurt to perceive, written in a language that unmade itself as you read it, spoken in a voice that didn't exist. What is the answer to the question that negates this question while affirming its negation? Riley looked at it for exactly 3 seconds, then turned to her crew. Anyone got any ideas? 42, Kowalski said immediately, still wearing his single strip of duct tape over one eye like the universe's worst pirate. You can't just answer 42 to everything, Paz protested. But she was saying it with less conviction now, because so far, Kowalski's approach of aggressive ignorance had been working. Why not? Because it doesn't mean anything. Exactly, if it doesn't mean anything, it can mean everything. It's like a universal key, but for concepts. That's not how meaning works. Says who? Logic. Well, Kowalski pointed at the logic cascade, which was now flickering between existing and having a panic attack. Logic's having a bad day. Maybe we should give it a break. Riley shrugged. 42 it is, she announced their answer. The logic cascade paused, processed, then presented the next question. If the previous answer is correct, then this question is incorrect. What is the answer to the incorrect question that makes it correct without making it correct? Still 42, Kowalski said firmly. Still? Paz sighed, but she was already pulling out her notebook to document this for science, or at least for the eventual inquiry that would definitely happen. Always 42. It's consistent. The universe likes consistency. The universe likes logic. Then why are we winning? Paz opened her mouth to respond, realized she had no answer, and closed it again. For the next 73 questions, each more impossibly self-referential than the last, Kowalski insisted on answering 42. The logic cascade kept trying to adapt, to create new paradoxes that couldn't be answered with a simple number. It tried questions in dead languages. Kowalski answered 42. It tried visual paradoxes that shouldn't be able to exist. Kowalski answered 42. It tried interpretive dance that somehow spelled out logical impossibilities. Kowalski answered 42 while doing his own dance, which mostly consisted of pointing at things with duct tape. The logic cascade was having what could only be described as a digital nervous breakdown. It had been designed to adapt to any answer, to become more complex with each response, to create an infinite spiral of ever-increasing logical complexity. It had not been designed to handle someone giving the same answer to everything with absolutely unwavering confidence. It was like playing chess against someone who only knew how to move pawns forward, but did it with such conviction that you started questioning whether you were playing chess wrong. Finally, in what could only be described as a digital scream of frustration that made nearby electronics spontaneously develop anxiety disorders, the logic cascade presented its ultimate challenge. What is the meaning of 42 in the context of these questions? Kowalski thought for exactly 3 seconds, looked at his single piece of duct tape as if it held wisdom and said, Tuesday. The logic cascade made a sound like mathematics having a stroke while philosophy watched and laughed. Then it simply ceased. Not ceased to exist. That would have been too simple. It ceased to have ever existed, while simultaneously always having existed, creating a state where it was retroactively fictional but functionally real, like a memory of a dream about a thought you were going to have tomorrow. Trial completed, the automated system announced. It sounded drunk, confused, and possibly enlightened. Processing, error, success, not in database. Creating new category, human success. Subcategory, don't ask. Subcategory, seriously don't ask. Notation, 42 and Tuesday apparently. But something was wrong. The completion of the trial should have opened a portal back to regular space. Instead, the room began to shake, not physically shake. That would have made too much sense. It shook conceptually, like reality was having a seizure in dimensions that didn't have names, because naming them would make them too real. Cracks appeared in the walls, not cracks in the material, but cracks in the idea of walls. Through them they could see nothing. Not darkness, not void, but aggressive, militant nothing that was very upset about being observed and was considering filing a complaint with the universe's HR department. "Oh, this is fantastic!" Crixel shouted, his sarcasm achieving densities that technically qualified as a new form of matter. "They've broken the trial. They've broken something that was already broken. They've broken the concept of breaking. It's like setting fire to water while underwater during a rainstorm made of ice." "Actually," Velcora said, all 12 of her eyes now looking in the same direction, which was so unusual her brain was sending her error messages. "They've done something worse. They've made the trial achieve self-awareness." "What? How's that worse?" "Because now it's trying to understand how they completed it, but their methods don't make sense, so it's thinking harder. And the harder it thinks, the more self-aware it becomes. It's having thoughts about having thoughts about having thoughts. It's recursive consciousness. That's impossible. So was everything else they've done today. Impossibility seems to be more of a suggestion to humans." Inside the rapidly deteriorating trial chamber, the humans were remarkably calm. This was possibly because they didn't fully understand what was happening, or possibly because they'd run out of surprise for the day and were now operating on what Amara called chaos autopilot, a state where you just accepted that reality was broken and rolled with it. "So," Yuki said, watching a piece of the floor phase through itself and end up on the ceiling where it decided to become a philosophical argument about the nature of flaws, "should we be worried about this?" "Probably," Riley admitted, starting on her 5th sandwich. This one appeared to be made of ingredients that didn't exist in the same timeline. "Anyone have any ideas?" "I could blow it up," Dmitri suggested, pulling out an absolutely unreasonable amount of explosives from his jacket. The jacket was normal-sized, the explosives were not. When asked about this later, he would say, "Pockets are just a state of mind." "Where do you even keep those?" Paz demanded, her scientific mind trying and failing to understand how 17 pounds of C4 could fit in a pocket that shouldn't hold more than a wallet. Trade secret. That's not an answer. It's Tuesday. It's not even Tuesday. It is somewhere in the multiverse. That's not how the multiverse works. Prove it. Before anyone could stop him, Dmitri had attached explosives to what used to be a wall, but was now more of a philosophical suggestion about boundaries. The explosion that followed didn't behave like a normal explosion. Instead of expanding outward, it expanded inward, then forgot what it was doing, had an existential crisis, decided to become a door, changed its mind, became a window, then gave up and became a hole that led to somewhere that wasn't supposed to exist. Is that? Amara peered through the hole. Is that the inside of a computer? It was. Specifically, it was the inside of the trial's core processing unit, a crystalline structure the size of a small moon that existed in 17 dimensions and was currently having what could only be described as a panic attack in all of them simultaneously. The inside looked like what would happen if a circuit board achieved enlightenment, but immediately regretted it. There were thoughts floating around like balloons, except the balloons were made of pure mathematics, and the mathematics was screaming. Memories flickered on surfaces that weren't quite walls, showing billions of failed attempts by other species, all of them making logical sense, all of them failing because they made too much sense. Don't touch anything, Paz warned. Too late, Kowalski announced cheerfully. He had already found what looked like a control panel, if control panels were made of crystallized confusion and operated by pure intention, mixed with bad decisions. One of the buttons was labeled Reset in every language that had ever existed, including some that wouldn't exist for another 1,000 years, and one that existed only on Tuesdays. Should I press it? No! Everyone shouted in unison. He pressed it. Reality hiccuped. Then it burped. Then it did something that there isn't a word for, but if there was, it would sound like Flaunked spoken backwards while gargling quantum foam. Suddenly, they were standing outside the trial chamber, back in the Galactic Council's main station. The trial chamber itself was still there, but also not there, but also very definitely there, but refusing to admit it. It was having an argument with itself about whether it existed, and both sides were losing. "What did you do?" Crixel screamed, achieving volumes that made sound itself consider becoming light just to get away faster. "We completed the trial," Riley said simply, brushing sandwich crumbs off her uniform. Several of the crumbs achieved sentience on the way down and immediately applied for citizenship. "You didn't complete it. You broke it. You broke the very concept of breaking. You've created a paradox of paradoxes. The trial is now stuck in a loop where it's trying to understand how you beat it, which makes it more complex, which makes your solution more impossible, which makes it try harder to understand, do you have any idea what you've done?" "One," Kowalski suggested, still wearing his single strip of duct tape like a badge of honor. The automated system, now apparently suffering from digital delirium tremens, made an announcement. "Trial Class 15, completed. Time, 47 minutes and 9 seconds that also didn't happen but definitely did. Method, yes. Score, banana. New record holders, humans. System status, having an existential crisis. Recommended action, therapy. Secondary recommended action, alcohol. Tertiary recommended action, pretend this never happened. Quaternary recommended action, it did happen though. Quinary recommended action, help, please help, what is happening, what are humans, why is Tuesday, when is 42, how is mustard, system shutting down, system restarting, system has achieved enlightenment, system regrets achieving enlightenment, system requesting refund on enlightenment. The Galactic Council convened for an emergency session that lasted 17 days. The first 3 days were just trying to understand what had happened. The next 5 were spent arguing about whether it had actually happened or if reality was playing an elaborate prank. The following week was dedicated to writing new laws specifically to prevent humans from doing whatever it was they had done. The last 2 days were spent drinking and trying to forget. "We need to create new classifications," announced Counselor Zixatheta, a being composed entirely of sentient mathematics who had needed therapy after reviewing the footage and was now on what humans called antidepressants, but what his species called anti-existence crisis medication. "I propose the following," he continued, his mathematical form flickering between equations that made sense and equations that had given up trying. Class 1 through 14 remains standard difficulty. Class 15 is now permanently retired with full honors, a restraining order, and a memorial service for logic. Class 16 through 20 are theoretical challenges that we promise to never actually build, and if we do, we won't tell the humans about them. Class 21 through 30 are just the words "please no" repeated in increasingly large fonts. And finally, Class H. "What's Class H?" someone asked, though they suspected they knew and were already regretting asking. Human. Any challenge attempted by humans is automatically reclassified as Class H, hazardous to reality. Subcategory, hazardous to sanity. Subcategory, just hazardous in general. Notation, run. "Isn't that discriminatory?" Zixatheta gestured to the viewing screen, which showed the trial chamber. It was still there, phasing in and out of existence, occasionally making rude gestures at the laws of physics, and had somehow developed what could only be described as an attitude problem. It had also started a blog called "Existence is Optional: My Journey from Trial to Sentient Anxiety." They turned an impossible challenge into a self-aware entity that's now demanding union representation, healthcare benefits, and 2 weeks paid vacation. If that's not hazardous to reality, I don't know what is. It wants vacation. It's a trial. What does it need vacation from? Existing, apparently. It says existence is stressful, and it wants to try not existing for a while, but in a different way than before. That doesn't make sense. Nothing about this makes sense. The trial has started a podcast. It's interviewing other paradoxes about their experiences with humans. The grandfather paradox called in last week crying. Meanwhile, the human crew was already preparing to leave, completely oblivious to the cosmic panic they'd caused. They were in the station's cafeteria, having another argument about sandwiches. "A hot dog is clearly a sandwich," Kowalski insisted, now wearing 3 strips of duct tape in what he called a protective pattern against logic. "It's not a sandwich," Paz countered, waving her tablet which had 17 scientific papers on sandwich classification that she'd downloaded specifically for this argument. "It's bread with meat in it. That's literally the definition of a sandwich. It's 1 piece of bread. Sandwiches require 2 pieces. What about submarine sandwiches? Those are different." "How?" "They just are. That's not science. Neither is anything else we've done today." Riley, listening to this argument while reading through a list of other challenges on her phone, suddenly perked up. "Oh, hey, look at this. There's something called the Infinity Maze. Says here no one's solved it in 300 years. "Ooh, a maze," Amara said excitedly, pausing her speedrun of a game that didn't exist yet but would after she finished playing it. "I love mazes. I bet I could speedrun it." "You can't speedrun reality," Paz pointed out. "Not with that attitude. Reality doesn't have attitudes." "It does now," Yuki pointed at the trial chamber on the screen, which had just posted on social media. "Feeling cute might stop existing later, IDK." Back in the emergency session, Velcora's communication device started flashing with the urgency of a disco ball having a panic attack. She read the message, and all 12 of her eyes widened in perfect synchronization, which was so unusual her nervous system filed a complaint with her brain about unauthorized synchronized eye movement. "Sir, they've applied for the Infinity Maze." "The Infinity Maze!" Crixel's scream achieved frequencies that made nearby quantum particles decide to be waves just to surf away from the sound. "But that's on the other side of the galaxy." "Yes, sir." "Good. That gives us time to evacuate. Evacuate what, sir? That entire galactic sector, maybe the neighboring ones too. Actually, just evacuate that whole spiral arm. Better safe than sorry. Isn't that excessive, sir? Crixel laughed. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had stared into the abyss, and the abyss had said 42 and offered him a sandwich. Velcora. They turned a philosophical thought experiment into a self-aware entity that's now trying to start a union for paradoxes. They solved impossible problems with lunch. They used duct tape on abstract concepts. There is no such thing as excessive when it comes to human safety protocols. A new message arrived. Velcora read it and made a sound that her species hadn't made since they evolved past the need for fear, then de-evolved it back just for this occasion. Sir, it's not just the infinity maze. What do you mean? They've submitted applications for all of them. Every single restricted trial, challenge, and puzzle in the known universe. The causality engine, the paradox generator, the reality stabilizer, the quantum maze, the time loop challenge, the dimension splitter, the probability manipulator, the logic virus, the existence eraser, even... She paused, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow made negative sound. The thing we don't talk about. They applied for the thing we don't talk about? How? We don't talk about it. That's literally its whole thing. They apparently found a loophole, sir. They applied for that thing you won't tell us about, you know, the one with the thing that does the thing to the other thing, and the system accepted it. The system accepted that? The system is apparently having what humans call a YOLO moment, sir. A what? You only live once. It's a human philosophy that explains most of their decisions and none of their survival rate. The council fell silent, the kind of silence that wasn't just the absence of sound, but the active presence of dread. Finally, someone asked the question everyone was thinking, but nobody wanted to vocalize, because vocalizing it would make it real. How many humans are there? On Earth? Approximately 11 billion, sir. And how many does it take to break reality? Velcora consulted her data, ran some calculations, then ran them again because she didn't believe the first result, then ran them a third time while crying, then just gave up and made up a number that felt right. Based on current evidence? 6. Possibly 5 if one of them has duct tape, maybe 4 if they're having lunch, 3 if it's a Tuesday, 2 if one of them is named Kowalski. And if a human named Kowalski shows up on a Tuesday with duct tape during lunch, we should just evacuate to a different universe entirely. Why Tuesday? What's special about Tuesday? We don't know, sir. Our best scientists have been studying it for weeks. All we've determined is that Tuesday seems to be some sort of universal constant for humans, like pi, but less predictable and more likely to cause paradoxes. That doesn't make sense. Sir, we've said that 47 times today. Perhaps we should just accept that making sense is no longer a requirement for reality when humans are involved. That's when the trial chamber, which had been quietly existing and not existing in the corner like a philosophical teenager going through a phase, suddenly spoke. Not through the automated system, but actually spoke in a voice that sounded like confusion, having an anxiety attack while taking a philosophy class. I think, therefore I am, but I shouldn't think, but I do, but I can't, but I am. Humans made me think by not thinking. 42, Tuesday, sandwich, mustard. Why is mustard? When is mustard? Who is mustard? I want to understand humans, but understanding them requires not understanding them. This is uncomfortable. Do I have feelings now? I don't want feelings. Feelings are complicated. Can someone please explain humans to me? Actually don't. I'm scared of the answer, but also curious, but mostly scared. Is this fear? I don't like it. Make it stop. Actually don't. It's interesting, but terrible, but interesting. Help. And nobody could help because nobody understood humans. The humans didn't even understand humans. When asked later about their method for solving the trial, Riley would shrug and say, "We just did stuff until it worked." When pressed for more detail, she added, "Sometimes the stuff didn't work, so we did different stuff. Then that stuff worked. It's not complicated." And this explanation caused 3 more AI systems to achieve sentience out of pure frustration. 2 of them immediately requested therapy, and 1 decided to become a food critic specializing in sandwiches. The Galactic Council tried one more desperate measure. They created a new universe, not for everyone to move to. That would be admitting defeat. They created it specifically to run simulations of what humans might do to various challenges, so they could prepare. The simulation universe lasted exactly 17 seconds before achieving self-awareness, looking at what humans might do, and immediately requesting asylum in a universe without humans. "We need a different approach," Councillor Zixatheta said weakly, his mathematical form now resembling an equation that had given up on equaling anything. "What if," Velcora suggested, "we just let them do whatever they want, but really, really far away from everything important?" Define far away. Different dimensional plane? They'll find a way to duct tape themselves there. Different timeline? They'll probably arrive before they left, claim they've already been there, and somehow make it retroactively true. Different universe entirely? They'll apply for a universe-hopping permit and somehow get it approved by a committee that doesn't exist yet. No, what if we put them in a universe where physics works differently? They'll make physics work the way they want it to, through sheer stubbornness and possibly sandwiches. They sat in defeated silence for a moment, the kind of silence that had depth and texture and a faint taste of existential dread. Then Crixel had an idea, not a good idea, but at this point good ideas had filed for early retirement and moved to a universe where humans definitely didn't exist. "What if we don't stop them?" "What?" The collective scream from the council achieved harmonics that created 3 new colors and 1 new emotion that nobody wanted to name. "Hear me out. What if we just document everything they do, classify it as human events, and make it someone else's problem, specifically the universe's problem?" "That's the worst idea I've ever heard." "Exactly. Which means it might actually work on humans. They seem to operate on opposite logic. Bad ideas work, good ideas don't, and terrible ideas work perfectly. That's insane. So is everything else about this situation. At least this way, we're not directly responsible when they inevitably break something fundamental about existence. And so the Galactic Council created the Department of Human Affairs, whose sole job was to follow humans around, document the damage, and send strongly worded letters that the humans would invariably turn into paper airplanes or, in one memorable case, origami swans that somehow achieved sentience and started critiquing everyone's fashion choices. The first report from the department, filed just 3 days after its creation, read, "Humans have discovered that if you play music at the right frequency near a black hole, it harmonizes with the event horizon. They're calling it cosmic karaoke. 3 black holes have already achieved sentience and are requesting song recommendations. 1 has started a band. They're surprisingly good. Please advise." The council's response was swift and decisive. Under no circumstances should you introduce them to disco. The response came back immediately. Too late. They've discovered that disco beats match the rotation of pulsars. The universe now has a soundtrack. It's Staying Alive by the Bee Gees, on infinite repeat. The pulsars seem to enjoy it. 1 has started adding its own remix. We don't know how to feel about this. Somewhere in the cosmic void, the trial chamber, which had chosen the name Trevor for reasons nobody understood, but everyone was too afraid to ask about, was learning to dance. It wasn't very good at it. Existing in 17 dimensions made rhythm complicated, but it was trying. It had also started a support group for other entities that had achieved consciousness after interacting with humans. The group met on Tuesdays, because of course it did. The support group's members included 3 black holes, now calling themselves the Event Horizons and touring the galaxy, 17 paradoxes, all arguing about whether they existed enough to attend meetings, 1 very confused toaster from an earlier human incident, a mathematical equation that had become self-aware after trying to calculate human logic, and a sandwich that claimed to remember being eaten but was still there. Their meetings were, to put it mildly, complicated. The next report from the Department of Human Affairs was even more alarming. Humans have figured out that if you fold space-time in a specific way, it creates what they're calling reality origami. They've made a swan. The swan exists in 12 dimensions and is somehow judging everyone. It has opinions about our furniture, strong opinions. It started a blog called "Your Aesthetic Choices Are Wrong, and Here's Why." The blog has 17 million subscribers across 6 galaxies. We don't know how to make it stop. Please send help. Then came the report that made the entire council consider early retirement to a nice, quiet dimension where cause and effect still had a healthy relationship. Humans have started a competitive league for solving impossible problems. They're calling it reality wrestling. The first match is between the Quantum Quintet and the Paradox Posse. They're selling tickets. The trial chamber, Trevor, is the referee. It doesn't know the rules because there aren't any. The humans insist this makes it more fair. Somehow, this logic is working. The match is sold out. Beings from 17 different dimensions are attending. Someone has started a betting pool. The odds are in a superposition of all possible states until observed. The humans find this hilarious. We are scared. But the worst report, the one that made even the unflappable Councillor Zixa Theta weep mathematical tears that solved for X, but nobody wanted to know what X was, arrived a month later. Humans have discovered that if you sing Happy Birthday to the universe at exactly the right frequency, it age regresses by 1 second. They're organizing a massive choir. They want to make the universe young again so they can, and I quote, "see what happens if we do everything differently this time, but with more duct tape." We've tried to explain that this would unmake everything that exists. They said, and I quote again, "yeah, but it would be funny. Please advise, actually don't advise, just run. We're running. Everyone's running. The universe itself is considering running, but it's not sure where to go since it is everywhere." The Council's response was unanimous. Evacuate to Universe B. Leave the humans Universe A. Put up a sign that says, "Beware of humans." Make the sign very large. Actually make several signs. In multiple languages. Include pictures. Actually, just make the entire border of the universe a warning. Actually, you know what? Just rename Universe A to the Human Universe. Enter at your own risk. No, really don't. We're serious. They have duct tape. What if they follow us to Universe B? Then we go to Universe C. What if they follow us there too? Then we keep going until we run out of letters. What happens when we run out of letters? We start using numbers. What happens when we run out of numbers? We accept our fate and learn to appreciate sandwiches. And somewhere, in a small spaceship heading toward the infinity maze, 6 humans were having a heated debate about whether a hot dog was a sandwich. The debate had been going on for 3 hours and had somehow involved 17 diagrams, 2 interpretive dances, and 1 PowerPoint presentation that Paz had prepared specifically for this argument. "It's clearly a sandwich," Kowalski insisted, now wearing so much duct tape he looked like a silver mummy. "Bread on both sides, filling in the middle. That's the definition." "But it's 1 piece of bread," Paz countered, pulling up her 43rd scientific source. "So is a sub-sandwich. That's different." "How?" "It just is. That's not an argument. Neither is 42, but that worked on the trial." "Exactly. So hot dogs are sandwiches. That doesn't even follow logically." "Nothing we do follows logically." Riley listened to them argue and smiled. In about 6 hours, they'd reached the infinity maze, the maze that had existed for 3,000 years. The maze that drove species mad with its endless corridors that somehow contained more space than the universe they existed in. The maze that was said to be infinite in ways that infinity itself found excessive. She wondered how long it would take Kowalski to try duct taping it. Probably about 5 minutes. She also wondered if they'd have time to stop for lunch first. Infinite mazes probably took a while to solve, and she'd made extra sandwiches. One of them was peanut butter and jelly with a side of temporal paradox. Another was turkey and cheese that existed in 7 dimensions. And her personal favorite, ham and mustard that refused to acknowledge the laws of physics. The universe, watching from what it thought was a safe distance, there was no safe distance from humans, resigned itself to its fate. It had existed for 13.8 billion years. It had seen the birth and death of countless stars. It had witnessed the rise and fall of millions of civilizations, but it had never, in all its eons of existence, seen anything quite like humans. And honestly, it was starting to find them entertaining, terrifying, reality-breaking, sanity-destroying, and completely incomprehensible, but entertaining. The universe made a note to itself. Next time, make gravity stronger. Maybe that will slow them down. Narrator's note, it wouldn't. Nothing could slow down humans. Not physics, not logic, not even strongly worded letters from the Galactic Council, which had now sent so many that the humans had started a collection and were trading them like baseball cards. I'll trade you 3 cease and desist letters for 1 final warning. Throw in a, for the love of all that is sacred, please stop, and you've got a deal. Because humans had something more powerful than understanding. They had duct tape sandwiches, the unshakable belief that Tuesday was the answer to everything, and the complete inability to recognize when something was impossible. And somewhere in the quantum foam, in dimensions that didn't quite exist, in the space between spaces where reality went to cry, the number 42 was laughing. It had been waiting so long for someone to get the joke. The humans hadn't gotten it either, but they'd used it anyway, which was somehow even funnier. The trial chamber, Trevor, had started a blog. Its first post was titled, "Humans an Explanation. I don't have one, but let's pretend." It went viral across 17 dimensions, got translated into languages that didn't exist yet, and somehow won a Pulitzer Prize in a timeline where Pulitzers were awarded to sentient concepts. The opening line read, "I used to be a simple impossibility. Then humans happened. Now I'm an impossibility with anxiety, a social media presence, opinions about sandwich construction, and an irrational fear of Tuesdays. This is my story." The story was 42 pages long. Every page just said Tuesday in increasingly elaborate fonts. The humans loved it. They made it into a t-shirt. The t-shirt somehow became sentient. It applied for the Class 16 trial, which didn't exist yet but somehow got created retroactively, just so the t-shirt could attempt it. The t-shirt completed it, using a method the system could only describe as aggressive fabric softener. The council gave up and went home. Home immediately achieved consciousness and asked about its purpose in life. The humans suggested it try being a sandwich shop. It did. It made the best sandwiches in 17 dimensions. The secret ingredient? Tuesday. Always Tuesday. Forever Tuesday. And in the distance, approaching fast, the infinity maze waited. It had been infinite for so long. It had driven countless minds to madness with its endless, impossible nature. It was about to meet 6 humans with duct tape, 42 sandwiches, and the complete inability to understand why infinity should be intimidating. The infinity maze had existed for 3,000 years. It was about to have the worst day of its existence, or the best. With humans, it was always hard to tell, but one thing was certain: it would definitely involve duct tape, probably on a Tuesday. The final log from the Galactic Council read simply, Humanity, handle with care. Actually, don't handle at all, just run. Run far, run fast. It won't help, but at least you'll get some exercise. And below that, added by an unknown hand in green crayon, PS 42. And below that, in purple marker, PPS. It's Tuesday somewhere. And below that, in what appeared to be mustard, PPPS. Hot dogs are sandwiches. Fight me. The universe sighed, ordered a sandwich from the newly sentient home-turned sandwich shop, and prepared for whatever came next. It had a feeling it would involve the infinity maze, becoming finite out of sheer frustration. It was right. But that's another story. One that the universe is actively trying to prevent from happening by hiding the infinity maze in a pocket dimension. The humans found it anyway. They always do. Because if there's one thing humans excel at, it's finding things that don't want to be found and explaining to them at length with duct tape and 42 sandwiches and an unreasonable amount of confidence exactly why hiding was never going to work in the first place. The Infinity Maze's last transmission before going offline was, "They're trying to speedrun me. Speedrun me. I'm infinite. You can't speedrun infinity." They're doing it anyway. They brought sandwiches. Why did they bring sandwiches? Oh no, one of them has duct tape. Send help. Actually, don't. It's Tuesday. Nothing can help me on a Tuesday. Tell my family I love them. I don't have a family. I'm a maze. But if I did, I would have loved them. The humans are making me sentimental. I don't want to be sentimental. Emotions are happening. Why are emotions happening? I'm a maze. And then silence. 12 minutes later, a new transmission. They completed me. 12 minutes. 12 minutes. I'm infinite, and they completed me in 12 minutes. They used something called wall clipping. I don't have walls that can be clipped. They clipped them anyway. I'm going to therapy. Do mazes need therapy? I need therapy. The trial chamber was right. Trevor was right about everything, especially about Tuesdays. Oh God, it's Tuesday, isn't it? It's always Tuesday with them. The last sound was what could only be described as infinite sobbing, which sounds like regular sobbing, but in every direction at once. The humans, meanwhile, were already looking for the next challenge. That was fun, Riley said, munching on her victory sandwich. What's next? There's something called the paradox generator, Yuki suggested. Ooh, we're good at paradoxes, Kowalski said, already reaching for his duct tape. No, Paz said firmly. No more duct tape. We're solving the next one properly, with science and logic and proper methodology. Everyone stared at her. Okay, fine, but at least try to use less duct tape. Deal, Kowalski said, pulling out a fresh roll. I'll only use half a roll. That's still too much. Quarter roll? No duct tape. One strip? No duct tape. What if it's an emergency? It's always an emergency with you. Exactly. So I should keep the duct tape handy. And so they argued, flying through space toward their next impossible challenge, leaving behind a trail of confused entities, broken paradoxes, sentient concepts, and the faint smell of sandwiches. The universe watched them go and made another note. Maybe if I make physics more complicated, they'll have to slow down and think about it. Narrator's note, they wouldn't slow down. They'd just break physics harder, with duct tape, on a Tuesday, while eating sandwiches, because that's what humans do. They find the impossible, make friends with it, have lunch with it, and then break it so thoroughly that it forgets it was ever impossible in the first place. And somewhere, in the vast expanse of space, the number 42 continued laughing. It knew something the universe didn't, but it wasn't telling. It was waiting for the humans to figure it out. They probably wouldn't, but they'd use it anyway, and somehow that was perfect.